Namaste. So I want to tell you about a dream I had, and I very seldom remember dreams. But I need to define a couple things. The first is, are you familiar with Big Dog clothing? I have some of their t-shirts. It was the coolest clothes. They would like insert a dog instead of some other characters, like a big sort of St. Bernard looking dog. So I have a t-shirt that I wear here once in a while that has 4 dogs or 5 dogs in the back that are dressed like South Park characters. And one of the dogs says, "Oh my God, they fixed Kenny." You know, so it's instead of killed Kenny, they fixed Kenny. And it's all that kind of stuff, play on words. And they not only made t-shirts, they made sweatshirts and underwear, boxer shorts and hats. They used to have a store at the Mall of America, so when we'd go up there, I'd always get Big Dog stuff. So now we've defined that. And then, do you remember these sleds that were like saucers, metal saucers? And they had the strap handle on either side that you go, okay, now we know that. Aaron only remembers the plastic ones. Yes. And then the Jetsons, right? Everybody remembers the Jetsons. Okay. So, in this dream, I'm at this big, huge church. And I was invited to this conference by a friend of mine named Chad Abbott, who lives outside Cincinnati. He's a United Church of Christ pastor who used to be a United Methodist pastor. And his wife was actually part of the Universal Anglican Church, his wife Shannon. So we were at this big Methodist church for this conference, and it was very important that you had your Bible with you. And so I had brought my Bible with me, and it was for some reason important that the whole weekend we prance around in our robes, even when we were just meeting. Why this was important, I don't know, but it was in the dream. And everybody's Bible was for some reason precisely identical. And they all got mixed up, which was a big problem. I don't know what that means, but I suspect there's a deep meaning to that. And then we were supposed to go do this big procession into the church, and it was like a maze or in the sanctuary, trying to find your way from where we were meeting in the sanctuary. And there were staircases up and down, and there was a group of elderly people at the bottom of the staircase, only I didn't know it as I was sliding down the banister in my robes, shouting, "Wee!" which is something I might do.
On a saucer or not?
Not the saucer yet, the saucer's coming.
Okay.
So, but I couldn't find my Bible, and anyway, I finally got in the procession, and it was this, very often when I have dreams about traditional churches, something goes wrong in terms of getting ready for the procession. Yeah. And then very often when I finally do get in there, it's like the churches are very front heavy, and that was the case here. Like the front is huge. It's almost like they're a gigantic mushroom sort of laid down. And where everybody's sitting, they can't quite see the people. And I'm pretty sure I know what that means. Anyway, the service ended and I had to go to a wedding. So I went out and got in my car, which was a saucer with a Jetsons glass bubble over the top. And for some reason, I took all my robes off in the car, and for some reason, I decided I would drive out to the wedding naked from the waist down. And it was winter. And so, and I was going out on 94 towards Oconomowoc, and the other cars were like regular cars, and I'm driving my saucer out there. And the wedding was at a place that was kind of a conflation, I think, of the Grand Geneva National and log cabins. But when I got there, the parking lots were filled with snowbanks, snow mounds, and so I couldn't park my saucer. And being a Jetsons kind of saucer, well, people could see in. So I found a pair of Big Dog boxer shorts and kind of put them over my lap. And it occurred to me that since my saucer was an electric car, I needed to park close to a building to plug it in. And actually, it was a wedding of a couple that I really married, and I baptized 3 of their kids since. And so there was a primary big lodge, and then there was this other building over here that I thought would be out of the way. And so I could pull back there and plug in my saucer and put some pants on. And the alarm clock went off. And I woke up. But it was interesting that I had that dream this week when the theme I chose was, who told you you were naked? Which is not just this passage from Genesis, but a book I read in the late 80s or early 90s that was called Who Told You You Were Naked? That was really important to me at the time, though I couldn't tell you what was in it. But I could tell you kind of what was in it. And as I was reflecting on this Genesis passage, I was reminded that John Swan, who's a retired bishop from the Episcopal Church, likes to make fun of this story as being very unrealistic because how could you play hide and seek and hide from God? And I don't necessarily agree with his assessment of that, because I think and I'm not saying we're children and God is the parent, but we've played hide and seek with kids and we let them think that we can't find them. I mean, sometimes there's a reason to let somebody think you can't find them. And obviously, Adam and Eve in the myth had been running around naked since the beginning. And it's only at this point, after eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they realize that they're naked. And God's question is very interesting. Who told you that you were naked? And so now if we back up a little bit to Sharon Salzberg. Sharon Salzberg is one of my favorite Buddhist teachers. She is this round woman who used to be a very skinny woman and now takes a lot of criticism because of her weight. And it's really apparent to me that she's been ill because she has what's sometimes called moon face from taking a lot of steroids. And if you take steroids for an extended period of time, and you might do that for inflammation, respiratory inflammation, transplant, your face tends to get rounder. And when she was young, she was this really tiny person. And it was interesting to kind of watch as I would see her and she was starting to put on weight. She would still use publicity pictures that were a few years old before that had happened. And I saw a comment once on something a video of hers, or a video on YouTube or something, that said, I don't know why don't you use up-to-date publicity pictures, because you're an inspiration to those of us who struggle with body image or who have had an illness and we've changed. And I don't know if she saw it or what, but it wasn't long after that she changed that practice. And for me, just for myself, I like being around people that aren't quite so skinny. It makes me feel less naked. And this whole thing about the Dalai Lama not knowing even what low self-esteem was, strikes me as being very interesting. And they attributed to, there's been a bunch written about this Mind and Life conference, to the idea of Buddha nature in that culture. The idea that everybody is born, already a Buddha. But you just kind of have to scrape off the crud from life to be able to see it in them. And it's not that much different, really, than this idea that I want to say, let's say it this way. The idea that the goal is to see God in the other person. That if we look at everybody else hard enough, we'll find God in them. So, and I call that idea God nature. But we sure like to pick and poke, and maybe the difference too is a little bit, the Eastern mind isn't so dualistic. And in the West, we are much more dualistic thinkers, and so you're either good or you're bad, you're right or you're wrong, you're acceptable or you're not. And we seem to have this cultural need to make ourselves feel better by finding somebody who we can point to who isn't quite as good as us. And so, well, I may be bad, but at least I'm not like that guy. And that's always an investigation into trying to point out that somebody else is naked. It's maybe a byproduct of competition. It could be a byproduct of the way we do business in this country. But it's always looking for the chink in somebody's armor. And what if it's an imaginary chink? What if the truth is, in this story, that nothing really changed before they ate the fruit to after they ate it? They were naked before, and they were naked after. What changed was their opinion of themselves. You could say their awareness of themselves, but I think that's kind of unlikely, because if you're naked and you look down, you go, oh geez, I'm naked. They were okay with it at one point, and then literally instants later, an hour later, they weren't. And it started to affect how they interacted, not just with each other, but with God. And how much do churches exploit that? Certain churches. Some of it is, I can get you to come back if I can convince you that you need me. And the only way I can convince you that you really need me is if I can convince you that you're somehow inherently defective. And suddenly, it's not the serpent or the apple telling you that you're naked. It's the person who you're supposed to be trusting and helping, saying, it's too bad. And it's always diminishing. And especially in those traditions that talk about backsliding. You know, I'm saved today, but at any moment, I could slip down the hill and not be okay. Where we used to live, the lawn went up pretty sharply from the sidewalk to where the house was. We were on a corner. And one day I was walking along mowing the lawn, like on the edge of where it went up, and sure enough, my feet went out and I landed. And that's, that's the ultimate backsliding image. I was saved up here. And 5 seconds later, I was down literally on my butt and sliding down the hill. I mean, the impact of living that kind of a precarious existence is just horrific. The stress involved in that is horrible. And notice that God doesn't say, man, who told you that there's something wrong with you? Who told you about this inherent defect you have? God just says, who told you you were naked? And since they were naked before and they're naked now, Adam had to be feeling like there was something that had become wrong with him. To the extent that we can move to a place where we realize that we're perfect and getting better all the time, and that's a very non-dual sort of thought, we're going to be in a healthier place. To the point where we say, to the extent that we can say, yes, I make mistakes, but it doesn't change my inherent worth. Even if you like the language, yes, I sin. But it doesn't mean that that's a great surprise to a supposedly all-knowing, all-seeing God. It means that we're human. And that we were made this way. I sound like a Lady Gaga song. But that we were made this way. And there's nothing about making mistakes or facing challenges or needing to grow that says we are defective. It just says we're on a journey. And maybe the thing about that tree in the garden wasn't that it was really the knowledge of good and evil, as it's sometimes referred to. But maybe it was that it contained the idea that there was good and evil, or stated another way, good stuff and defective stuff. What if everything's just the way it's supposed to be, even if it's not perfect? And that's okay. And our judging that is just a game that is bound to set us back. So our neighbor's obnoxious. Well, maybe that's the way he's supposed to be. world isn't a perfect place. Well, in truth, that's the way it is. Now, it doesn't say that we can't work to change it, but we don't have to be unhappy with where we are, or think that there's something inherently wrong about where we are. We can say instead that we're on this journey, and that rather than being defective, we're right where we're supposed to be. And that's different from saying we maybe just want to stay there, but that we're moving along all the time. And challenges will arise, and we'll meet some of them, and we'll fail to meet others, and that's okay too. That life isn't a test, but it's a great adventure. But you can only enjoy the adventure if you don't try and make yourself something that you can never be, which is perfect in the sense that we never make a mistake, that we never make an error in judgment. Imagine what being free to just enjoy life would feel like. Even if somebody came up and said, "You're naked."